I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and to the Greek. I'm Chad Davis, and this is Romans 1:16 Radio. So, if you recall chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had a dream. And in that dream was an immense statue of a man. And that statue had a head that was gold. The chest and arms were silver. The waist was bronze. And, that's probably everything from the midsection down, right? Then the legs were iron and the feet were iron and clay. But Nebuchadnezzar sets up an image inspired by his dream. And it's all gold. It's probably gold-plated, but it's all gold. Now, I just want to give you an idea of the size of this statue. So, the height is 60 cubits. A cubit is the length of the king's forearm, so someplace around 18 inches, maybe 20 inches. But we're going to just go nice, easy math and go 1.5 feet per cubit. So, this statue is 90 feet high. It is 11 stories high. You see your average apartment complex got 3 floors? Put 3 or 4 apartment complexes on top of one another to get the size of that building. Very imposing, tall statue. And Nebuchadnezzar summons everyone to come and worship this statue. He summons a group of officials. I'm going to read it one more time, and then I'm going to stop reading it. Satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, and all the officials. 8 different categories. And this is repeated a couple times. Did you notice how the language in the first 7 verses is repeated over and over? The image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. It's in there 7 times. It says Nebuchadnezzar set up 7 times. It brings a narrative, dramatic tension. Something is going to happen, and it's highlighted by the repetition of all of the different officials and magistrates that have to be there. It's highlighted by all of the different musical instruments. We could just say, when the sound of the band plays, but they don't say that. They list all of the musical instruments, and they do it again. And they do it again a little later. And they list all these instruments. It's meant, I think, from a literary perspective, to heighten the drama. Now, this drama is already played out 2 times in the book of Daniel. Do you know that? Already, 2 times, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel have been tested. Okay? Already, a foreign king, Nebuchadnezzar, has put them, Brother Leroy, good evening, has put them to the test. In chapter 1, they are given the opportunity to eat the delicacies from the king's table. They might have had to compromise their religious beliefs and their faith in God. If they ate meat and they didn't know where it come from. Maybe it had been strangled. Maybe it was some kind of meat that they're not allowed to eat. Maybe it had been sacrificed to idols. And so they decided to refuse the food, and they graduated top of their class in the Babylonian courtiers training. They graduated top of their class. And in chapter 2, they're tested. All the wise men are tested. What is the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had? And if you don't tell me what the dream is, and you don't tell me the interpretation of the dream, well, then I'm going to put you all to death, says the king. And that includes Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. And so what do? They have a prayer meeting. They go to church. They pray, and the Lord reveals the answer to them. And you might not notice, you might not remember, because it's not really key to the story, but in the last 2 verses of Daniel chapter 2, Daniel asks, and King Nebuchadnezzar promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have moved up in authority, in position, in rank in the court of Babylon. And I think we get to verse 8, we're going to find out that actually causes them a little bit of a problem. But this test that they're being given is not the first test. It is the third test. It is the same kind of test. The same king, Nebuchadnezzar, is laying out another ultimatum. The last ultimatum was, interpret my dream or die. This ultimatum is, bow down and worship my image that I have set up or die. So first let's talk about what is the image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. What do y'all think the image is of? Crystal? Crystal says himself. So is it an image of Bel? Is it an image of Marduk? Is it an image of Nego? Is it an image of Nebuchadnezzar? I'm with you, Crystal. I think it is Nebuchadnezzar. And there's two reasons why I think that. Number one, in chapter 2, when Daniel interprets a dream, he says, you, King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. And after you are going to come these kingdoms, I'm paraphrasing, the silver kingdom, the kingdom that comes after you will be lesser. It will not be as glorious as your kingdom. And the kingdom that comes after that, the bronze kingdom, it won't be as glorious as yours. And I think by this time Nebuchadnezzar's going, yeah. I already heard the rest of this. I'm the head of gold. It went to his head, quite literally. And then, that's reason number one, I think King Nebuchadnezzar likes the idea that he is the king of gold, the head of gold, and he would like to say to everyone, I'm the head of gold. In fact, I'm the whole statue of gold, and there won't be any kingdoms that come after mine, and my kingdom's going to last forever. And you all need to come out here in the yard of the church on the plain of Dura and bow down and acknowledge that I am this everlasting king. No one's coming after me. I am Nebuchadnezzar, King of Kings. And they all are willing to do it, aren't they? So everyone's gathered. And the threat is, anyone who does not bow down will be, get this word, cast into a fiery furnace. Have we heard anything else like that in the Bible? Pat says, the lake of fire. And whosoever's name was not written in the book of life will be cast into the lake of fire. Fire here and in Revelation refers to judgment. It looks like annihilation. It looks like you'll be killed. It looks like you'll be thrown into the fire, and that's the end of you. But it is certainly judgment. And as we get through this, we're going to try to remember that lake of fire parallel, because I think that that's important. You know, these Hebrew boys, they get rescued. They're probably not boys by this point, actually. They're probably young men. These Hebrew young men, they get rescued from the lake of fire. And we'll talk about how, and we'll talk about why, and we'll talk about who as we go forward. So here's the scene. Everybody who's anybody in Babylon has been summoned to acknowledge this 10-story high statue of King Nebuchadnezzar that is at least gold-plated. At least it's gold-plated if it's not solid gold. And everyone's told it's a worship service, y'all. It's a worship service. You don't just have to acknowledge and sign. You don't just have to raise your right hand and swear an oath that you'll be obedient. You don't have to recognize with a salute or a nod that Nebuchadnezzar is king. No, you have to bow down. When they play the music, all the music, see how that tension is built? Not just a little bit of music, all the music. The pipe, the horn, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music. 1 second, Ernesto. When the worship music is played, the command is you will bow down and worship before the image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Sure, okay. You know, it's not an unusual practice to have music and worship at the same time. It's normative. It's exactly how most cultures worship. But we think it's a test because we've read the story before and we know that this is about the crisis of the Hebrew boys. But it's not really set up as a test. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't really think anybody's not going to bow down. He thinks everybody's going to bow down. It's set up like a worship service. It becomes a test when somebody says, I'm not going to worship. Everyone's expected to bow down and worship this image. Do you remember the Hebrew word of the day from last week? It was tselem. It means image. And in Genesis is the only place where the word tselem is used in a positive light. God said, let us make man in our image. And in his image, he made him and male and female, he created them. Tselem is the image of God. Later on, Adam has a son named Seth, after his own likeness and image. Those usages in Genesis are the only place in the Bible where that tselem is used in a good light. Every other usage, including these usages, is about idolatry. Remember I said that last week when he dreamed about a big idol, a statue. Now, the tselem isn't the real thing. The tselem is a representation of the real thing. And if Crystal's point is correct, and I believe it is, then these people are supposed to bow down and worship the representation of Nebuchadnezzar, King of Kings. He wants to be worshipped, but he has this giant statue to be worshipped. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have succeeded. They've been top of their class among the Hebrew boys who were trained to be in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. They've been appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon in chapter 2. And do you think everybody else likes that? No. These foreigners, these Judeans, they're taking the good jobs. They've got these exalted offices, and I don't. And my son doesn't, and my son, he should, and they shouldn't. And so, therefore, verse 8, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are these certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you, and they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Have you ever heard it said, every man has his price? Yes. Ever heard that said? So, let's just say that you are one of these treasurers or counselors in Babylon, or an official from one of the provinces. And you come up to the plain of Dura like you're told, you're summoned, and your price is, I will bow down and worship the image if you don't kill me. Right? Every one of those folks has their price, and their price is, yep, I can be talked into idolatry if you don't kill me. But they knew it. They knew their man, Nebuchadnezzar. They knew that he was a man of pride and ego, and that he would truly react if he found out somebody didn't want to obey him. Somebody didn't want to worship his statue. Maybe somebody didn't think he should be king. And so they accuse these certain Jews, and they say, these are the ones that you appointed as the governors over the provinces of Babylon, O king. Little sarcasm in their voice. Right? These men, O king, pay no attention to you, and they knew exactly what reaction they would get from Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes if you do right, people are going to be against you. Sometimes if you succeed because you do right, people are going to be trying to trip you up. Amen. I remember when I'd been in the military since I was 17, but when I first showed up at my first unit as an active duty chaplain, the men of that unit, they did their best to trip me up. They told of their most sordid escapades, and they told of the most profane jokes, and they tried to get me to be in that party with them. They tried to get me to laugh. They were waiting to see Would I bow down to that image that they were, and their image was ugly. But they would see, was I just like them? We got into Iraq, and of course pornography is everywhere. And they didn't even believe me when I told them I don't have any in my room. There is none on my computer. There is none on my hard drive. They're like, oh, come on, chaplain. We know that you must have pornography in there. Yep. And sometimes if you are doing right, if you are succeeding, if God is blessing you, somebody is going to want to try to take what you have and take you down. And they come and they accuse these three young men, these righteous men, before Nebuchadnezzar. And I already took one rabbit trail, so let's take one more. Now, if you've read everything from Exodus up through Daniel anytime recently, you will see that idolatry is a constant problem in Israel. Over and over and over, king after, like every other king, every third king decides they're going to build idols instead of tear them down. And it is a perpetual problem. But now we get into Babylon. Now we're exiled and our freedom's taken away. Now we're out of our own country and we're slaves and we're eunuchs and we don't have a temple and we don't have priests and we can't worship our God our way, the way that we want to. But there are at least three men who, unlike the whole history of Israel up to this point, say we are not going to worship an idol. And that might have been the conversation on the way out there to the plain of Dura. Hey, Shadrach, you're going to bow down, right? How about it, Abednego? You know you're named after one of our gods. Isn't that correct? Abednego, servant of Nego. Well, we'll just see how you do out here. You know, when they built that big statue, I was out there. I watched them. When they stoked that fiery furnace to bake those bricks, to make that thing got hot. You had better not even think about telling King Nebuchadnezzar no, because we got something for you. He's got a question, but I'm going to ask you while he's going to ask that question. Would you look up Isaiah 43 for me, please? Ernesto.
There are only three.
Three.
What about the other two?
Daniel?
Yeah, the only three. Yeah.
Oh, what about all the other Jews?
Well,
okay, so there's two possible answers to that question. And Ernesto's, if you didn't hear him, Ernesto's question is, hey, only three Jews didn't bow down. What about all the rest of the Jews? Two possible answers. It's a good question. The first answer is, they're the only three ones that are faithful. But I don't like that answer. So it could be that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the only Jewish officials. And they're the only ones who are required to come out and bow down. I don't like that answer better. Now here's the thing. We don't know. This story isn't about every Jew in Babylon. It's not even about Daniel. Where's Daniel? Did Daniel bow down to the statue? Is Daniel there? Daniel doesn't even get mentioned. We don't know the answer to that question. But that's okay. The story is about these three Hebrew young men. And I'm going to call them this. This answer works for both of those scenarios, Ernesto. I'm going to call those three Hebrew young men the remnant. Okay? The remnant. Now, in Isaiah chapter 43, Israel is going into exile. Okay? So it's probably a few years before this incident. And God says to Israel, and I'm gonna probably misquote it, but I got Leroy to catch me here, okay? He says, fear not, for I have redeemed you. Oh, okay? And you are mine. I have called you by name. When you walk through the fire, it will not burn you. Is that right? Okay. All right. I know I forgot the first two words, but now, and they're the best two words in that chapter. But Isaiah predicted that somebody in exile was going to have to walk through fire. And he says, fear not. I have redeemed you, and you are mine, says the Lord. Does he know specifically about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Kind of doubt it. Doesn't matter if he does or doesn't. Here's the thing. God sent his people out in exile, but he did not destroy them or, key words, their faith. some of the exiles from Judah, from Israel, some of them I'm going to call, along with the prophets, the remnant, the ones who remain. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we know about their faith. We know the story. It's a familiar story. We don't even have to keep reading, but we're going to. And I believe Isaiah specifically had the remnant of Israel, and that's the ones who have faith. But here, at least 3 men passed that test. Okay, let's read on. Next page. Great question, Ernesto. Thank you. All right, now verse 13. You guys already know this, right? Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious. In a furious rage, he commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Now it says right there for the second time that they're men. Nebuchadnezzar answered them and said, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I set up?"
He set up.
That he set up.
Yeah, no, you said it right.
He said I. I didn't say I. He said I. Now I'm going to put my finger down. Now, wait a minute. Didn't Nebuchadnezzar worship Daniel and worship Daniel's God in chapter 2? Remember, he had incense brought before Daniel. He bowed down on his face before Daniel, and he said, "Great is the God of Daniel." Right? Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is a polytheist. It's no big deal for him to add one more god to his list of gods. He thinks he's divine anyway. So he thinks even though Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from Judea and the God of Daniel interpreted his dream, that the God of Israel is just one of those gods. And surely they worship the gods that they were specifically trained in chapter 1 to know about and worship. And the question is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? He is still a polytheist. He had a religious experience, but he was not converted. He did not become a child of the God of Israel just because he bowed down and offered some incense and a prayer. Now then, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Woo!
He really set himself up.
Woo! He is still confused. Yes, he is. Now, there will come a time when, in fact, that time is now, when saints all over the world are being put to death for their faith.
Jesus.
In this country, it's hard for us to grasp that. But Christians are the most persecuted and most often killed religious group on the face of the earth today. There were some mosque massacres in New Zealand, and that is a horrible, terrible crime, and may God comfort the families of the deceased. I don't care that they're Muslim. You shouldn't either. They're human beings made in the image of God. But at the same time, on the same day, in Nigeria, 140, 150, I forget the number, more than 100 Christians were killed by folks over there for their faith. Their wives and children, their houses were burned down, and it doesn't make the news.
Jesus.
Now, is it because nobody cares who gets killed in Africa? Or is it because we don't want to talk about Christians being victims because the program in this country is to make it sound like the Christian is the oppressor? I don't know what it is, but do not forget, the Christian is called upon in every age, even this age, to perhaps give up their life for their faith. If and when we finish the book of Daniel, and if and when we get into the book of Revelation, I will demonstrate for you very clearly that that is what's going on in the time when the book of Revelation is written. And I will show you that Christian martyrdom is a major theme of the book of Revelation. The idea that we're exempt from having to choose between our faith in God and our life is not an accurate idea. So let's try to make this personal as we sit in the seat of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and consider their response. Before I get to their response, though, does Nebuchadnezzar not call out God? Doesn't he kind of call out the God of Israel, therefore the only God? He says, and who is this God? I'm sorry, I misread it. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? You think you have a God that can deliver you out of my hands? Who is this God? The question is, we're talking about one Selim and another Selim. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are made in the image of God. How then shall the ones made in the image of God bow down to the one whose image is man-made? Someone made in the image of God is now going to bow down to an image that a human being has made. That's a dare that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will not take. They will not take it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Well, I'll tell my story about high school first, but then I want to give you the Hebrew word for the day. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I moved to New York. My dad was at West Point. He was a professor. I moved out there for a year, and I went to Highland Falls High School. And there was in one of my classes a kid that decided he would bully me. And he took something that was mine, and I stood up and went over to his desk and asked him for it back, and he told me I wasn't getting it back, and I demanded it back. And he told me how he was going to beat me up. And I looked at him and was pretty sure that he could do so. Yeah, I thought, well, he might be able to. But you know what I said to him? I said, my God is able to deliver me.
Yes.
But if not, I let him know I was standing right there. And he looked at me like I was crazy. There was no walking through the fire kind of miracle, but nothing happened, and I got my thing back. I told him, but if not, and he asked me, what are you talking about? Clearly, I could beat you up. And I'm like, yeah. And clearly, God could deliver me. But even if he doesn't, I know that he can. And you know, nothing happened. I got that from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I got that from Daniel chapter 3. But now let me take you to the Hebrew word for the day. And I've got them over on the board over here. I know it looks like a bunch of chicken scratch to you. But the top word over there in Hebrew is Elohim. Properly pronounced Elohim. And it means God. Here's the confusing part. That's the plural. But it's used of God all the time, all through the Old Testament. Elohim. Now, the singular is El, or Elohah, in Hebrew. And sometimes you'll see that like El Elyon, God Most High. El Shaddai, God Almighty. That's Hebrew. But this book, unfortunately, isn't written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic. At least chapter 3 is written in Aramaic, right? So, I don't know this word as well. Elohim. Elohim is Aramaic for gods, and Elohah is Aramaic for God. Now, it's important because in your Bible, you've got a lowercase g when Nebuchadnezzar says, who is the God? Because Nebuchadnezzar is a polytheist. Who is the God, lowercase g, that will deliver you? Okay? And he says, Elohah. Okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they say, if it be so, our God. Now, in our English Bibles, we put a capital G. I don't know why, but we did. But here it's Elohim. It's plural, as the way that the God of Israel is described in the plural. That is not to imply that the God of Israel is a plural. That's another discussion. But when in Hebrew a noun is pluralized, sometimes it does so because of its station, because of its greatness. Okay? And the God of Israel is almost always described Elohim, even though it's a plural noun. That's common. Doesn't mean that there are two or three, because he's a God, he's one. But when we get through this chapter, we're going to see the word God a few times, and I want to talk about that. When Nebuchadnezzar uses it, he doesn't use it the same way that the Hebrew boys do, and that'll become important down the road here. So the Hebrew boys, the Hebrew men, they say, well, you can throw us in the fiery furnace if you want. But they don't really thumb their nose at him. They don't. They continue to call him by his proper title, O King. Right? They say, we don't have to answer you in this. That's the closest they come. They're not disrespectful. They're not sassy. But they're not backing down. And I think that's important. You know, we can get downright full of pride and nasty when we defend our Christianity. And doesn't it tear apart our witness? Right? If we have to use character assassination, if we're going to get ugly while we're defending our faith, doesn't it tear down our witness? Would it tear down their witness if they said, "You're a pagan, you're a polytheist, you don't know anything of God, you worship wood and stone and precious metal that you made with your own hands. You sent your own guys out there to make that statue, and now you want us to worship it." They could have really mocked him, but they didn't. I think that's key. I think it's important. That there's a certain humility, a certain meekness that is required of the genuine believer. Let God fight your battles.
Exactly. Amen.
Let God fight your battles. Because you know what? If we resort to ugliness, if we resort to sarcasm, if we resort to insults and put downs, and we start calling someone fool, Jesus tells us we're in danger of hellfire. What? Yeah. But I see it all the time. And it's not the right answer. But they are polite and respectful as is appropriate, but they still do not compromise.
There's the faith too. Strong.
Oh, you're right on top. I just took the words right out of my mouth. Which one is it? Either and or both. Is it their faith or their faithfulness?
Wow, that's a good one.
Well, let's talk about it. If it's their faith, what's their faith in?
In God.
Their faith is in the character of God. They say, well, maybe God will deliver us. And if he doesn't, we still know that God is our judge. It's that faith is their belief in who God is. And I think it's both. I think it's their faithfulness that proves that they have faith. Right? You might say, well, you know, I believe in God. Why should I abstain from this thing that's sinful? Why should I believe in God. That's all I need, right? Nope. Our faithfulness demonstrates what we really believe. You can say with your mouth, I believe that God is holy, but then if you go out and you walk some other way, in the carnal way of the world, your acts demonstrate that you don't think he's all that powerful, or that he's all that holy, or maybe that he's not even real. You know, I don't think sin would really exist if we really truly believe that God was holy and expected holiness from us. But these boys in their conduct, they prove their faith and their faithfulness. Their faithfulness is a demonstration in their confidence in the nature and requirements of their God.
So if the faith is believed, then faithfulness is actually doing it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, so faithfulness, people after the Apostle Paul, people begin to think in two categories, and we get spun up around these categories till we can't think clearly. Faith versus works. Works and faith. Paul makes it super, super plain that we are saved by faith. But that faith is not apart from the way it's lived out in our lives. Don't want to get confused and say if you do certain things you get saved. That's not it. Don't want to get confused and say that it is your faithfulness that saves you. No, it's God's grace that saves you, and it is our faith, our belief in that He desires to save us and sent His Son and raised Him from the dead. If we believe that about God, that's where we find our salvation. But as soon as we're saved, it becomes a walk of faith. In other words, faithfulness. Salvation comes to us just like it came to Abraham, just like it comes to these Hebrew children, as you will see. Because they had, the word faith does not appear, but they had faith that God was going to deliver them. They said so, right? If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. They don't have to say, I believe. They are putting their bodies on the line.
Amen.
This is not like some theological argument among friends. This is 3 men with no power standing before the most powerful man in the world with a certain threat of death. He's got fury in his face and his veins popping out of his forehead, and he's shaking his fist, and everybody's watching to see, is he going to kill them like he said? And he knows when he hears the resolve and sees the posture that they're standing there, he knows it's going down. And they know it too. It's not an idle jest. It's not a boast thinking that nothing's going to happen. They know full well they're going in that furnace. They know full well they're going in that furnace. Here we go. How are we doing on time? We're doing great on time. Awesome. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury again, and the expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, I love it when I find a hard verse. I found it. Verse 19. You know that word Selim is in verse 19? It doesn't look like it, does it? It doesn't say image or statue or idol, does it? It says the expression on his face, the Selim of his face. Now, I want to suggest something that no Bible translator has been comfortable with. Do you have King James over there, Pat?
Yes, I do.
So King James says the form of his visage. Is that right?
Amen.
Form is a legitimate translation of the word Selim, because a form is a representation. Think about a seamstress' form. She's got the shape of a woman's torso that she puts the pieces on and she sews them together to make the dress. That thing is not a woman, even if it's shaped like a woman. It's called a form. King James says the form of his visage changed. ESV says the expression of his face changed. But that's not what the Aramaic says. It says the salam of his face, the image of his face. Now, other than 4 times in the book of Genesis, every other time of the 30 times in the Bible, the word Selim appears, it refers to an idol of Baal, to a molten idol, to a stone idol, to this idol that has been named about 8 times. And the first 8 times in chapter 3, the word Selim means statue. Why would it all of a sudden mean the expression on his face? Could it be that the image, the Selim, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's face changed? Now, King James didn't like that. ESV didn't like that. I didn't look any further. I didn't go check NASB. I didn't go look and see if I could find one Bible that saw it my way. But I read it in Aramaic, and it said the statue changed. It said the Selim of his face changed. Now, why, if every time up until now it meant statue, why should we think it doesn't mean statue in verse 19? I know, I'm all alone in the history of the interpretation of the book of Daniel.
All right.
Okay, I realize that for the last 2,600 years, nobody's ever at least written down this idea. But entertain with me one possibility. At least one other interpreter before me came up with an idea very similar. And what if I told you that interpreter was the Apostle John? And what if I told you in Revelation chapter 13, there was a beast, and that second beast commanded that an image be made of the first beast, and that breath be given to it so that it might speak and condemn people to death. Uh-oh. See, this statue comes to life or actually it doesn't say it actually does come to life. It says that the beast gave it power, gave it breath to do so. The idea of a statue coming to life is not a new idea. It's just an extra biblical idea. All right, here we go. Revelation 13. Let me see here. What verse is it? Here we go. And it was allowed to give breath to the image. Now that's Greek. That's not Selim. It's a Greek word. The image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anyone doesn't bow down and worship the image we throw into a fiery furnace? Now, in this text, in Revelation, it is explicit. It is perfectly clear that the statue is supposed to talk. And doesn't this look like it is a recapitulation, a rehearsal, a restatement of Daniel chapter 3? So this is the thing that the ancient idol worshipers all thought. They thought, here is my image of the god Solo, it says right on the front. And I am going to bow down before this image of Solo, and I'm going to light candles, and I'm going to pour out offerings, and maybe the spirit of Solo will come into this image and give it life. And maybe the prayers that I pray before the image will reach the ears of this God that's not a god. The idea that a statue comes to life is what they all wanted. It's not a new idea. It's just not a biblical idea. The Bible mocks this idea over and over and says, with some of the wood, you cooked your meal. And then with some of the wood, you bowed down. You bowed down and worshipped it. It's from the same piece of wood. You cut it out of a log, and you use some of it to bake bread, and then you use some of it. You bow down and worship. The Bible mocks the idea of worshiping an idol, but idol worshipers don't. They think it's serious. They think it's religion. So I'm just having fun. I don't think that your eternal security depends upon whether you believe that the image in Daniel chapter 3, the expression on the statue's face changed or not.
That's a theory, though. I'll tell you this.
It is a theory. Yes, Crystal.
If it's a sidebar, stop me. But another theory is, and I'm basing this off of chapter 2, verse 31, is that the statue has more than one face.
Oh,
It
yeah.
says head, but it doesn't say it doesn't have more than one face.
Two.
So maybe one of the images on the face is because it says it was a fright. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that the statue was a frightening sight.
Uh-huh.
So maybe there's more than one face, and first of all, who have you ever seen with more than one face? And maybe one of the faces has one of those faces.
Some of the apocalyptic images in Ezekiel and Revelation do have more than one face. Okay? That's not specific to Daniel. Did we talk about what apocalyptic is in the first week?
Yes.
We did, didn't we? Okay. It's the symbolic language of fantastic creatures and portents and angels. It's not meant to represent the real world in a one-for-one correspondence, but it has a meaning that's conveyed by the imagery that the author chooses. And Crystal, in some of the images in Ezekiel and then again in Revelation, there's more than one face. Even insects like locusts are given the faces of human beings. There's plenty of that. I didn't see what you're talking about in chapter 2. You said verse 31?
Yes, sir.
Well, in my translation, it talks about the image head in verse 32.
The head of this image was fine gold.
Mine says, in your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight.
Okay. But it doesn't say multiple faces, but you think maybe there could have been.
Yeah,
Sure. All right. I don't want to dispute that. I don't think I have any reason to. We don't know what the image looked like. I think it looked like Nebuchadnezzar. In my ESV Bible, which I somehow managed to leave on the dining room table, I've got a really nice picture and it's about 8 inches high. I was going to pass it around. Somebody asked me if I'd bring a picture. Really great picture that they put in one of the pages of my Bible of what it could have been. We don't have any kind of documentary evidence. So if I were to make a cartoon of Daniel chapter 3, I think when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to the statue, then Nebuchadnezzar gets furious, and the statue gets furious too. And the statue's face and eyes turn menacingly toward the Hebrew boys in the cartoon. You know, yeah, it's scary. It's apocalyptic, and that's the language that we really haven't gotten to the apocalyptic language until we get into the latter half of the book, but we're getting there. In chapter 7, we're going to have beasts rise out of the sea, and they have faces, and that's the kind of imagery I think is intended in chapter 3. Maybe an Aramaic scholar would just rip me apart and tell me that that's wrong, and I'll be like, okay, I guess you're right. But the thing is, there is a Canaanite background to the idea that statues came to life, and there is a New Testament correspondence that's very similar to this scene where the statue does come to life. So I think at least one other interpreter, the Apostle John, has read chapter 3, and he thinks that the Selim is not the expression on Nebuchadnezzar's face, but it's the form, it's the statue, it's the Selim. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. Now, what does this mean? 7 times? What does it mean when we say it's a perfect number? What does that mean? Yes, it is. Maybe. So, maybe it's completion. But what does that mean? See, here's what I think it means. It means as much as you can heat it, as hot as it will get. So Peter says, Lord, if my brother sins against me and asks me to forgive him, how many times should I forgive him? 7 times? See, Peter's saying 7 times, as many times I can forgive him, right? And Jesus says, no, I tell you 70 times 7. He says, yeah, as much as you can, to an order of magnitude, right? Over and over. I don't think it has to do with 7. I think 7 is a way of expressing as hot as you can get it. Yep. In this context. Now, this Hebrew usage of the number 7 through the whole Bible comes from the book of Genesis. That it was 7 days that God created the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day God rested. Yes, it's a number of completion. It's a cycle of days, of weeks, of years, and the 50th year is a Jubilee year, and God has some sense.
7th day he completed.
Yep. And so there's some sense that 7th is the end of things. And here in this context, heat it up as hot as you can get it. Go and throw extra coal in there and pump the bellows 7 times. Get it as hot as it will go.
And a roast will burn off the
Yeah,
bodies.
we're getting there. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning furnace. And these men were bound in their cloaks and their tunics and their hats and their other garments. This chapter is just full of hyperbole, isn't it? Drama. It's full of drama. And they're all tied up in ropes and cloaks and hats and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, I imagine that there must be an open section that the king can look in, because we see that he sees in. But I think they're probably thrown in from the top. And it's probably so hot up there that the men who took them up there expired from the heat. And they throw them down. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Okay, stop. Now let's talk about that word God again. This time, we have a choice. Do we hear this like it's said by a pagan polytheistic king, son of the gods? But he uses the word in the plural. Elohim. Elohim. Am I saying that right? Yes, I am. Elohim, which is the corresponding Aramaic word to the word Elohim that we use in Hebrew for the word God. Is he saying, before we even talk about who the son might be, is he saying he looks like the son of one of the gods, like I've got it translated in my ESV. Pat, what do you have in King James?
Oh my goodness.
I have it. It's the son of God.
The son,
The son of God.
the son of God.
I'm sorry, I was about to go over to another chapter.
Okay, you have, so Denise has son of the gods, plural, and you have the son of God, capital G.
Yes.
Okay, so these two translations have chosen to go about it differently, and therein is our choice. So I hear it coming from Nebuchadnezzar, a Babylonian king that worships a multitude of gods, mostly himself, and he says, Elohim was a son of the gods, lowercase g. But it's not by accident that is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego call our God. They use the plural, just like Nebuchadnezzar does. So I think for the reader, there's a double entendre. By that I mean you're supposed to see both senses of the word. The pagan king thinks it's one of the gods, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they think it's their God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace. See, now there's a mention of the door. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. This time he used the singular, Eloha. Come out and come here. Then I think I'd have done a cartwheel first before I did what he said. I know, right? I think I might have, made a sign at him or something from inside the fire. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, prefects, the governors, and the king's counselor gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of those men. Now, everybody saw, get this, the deliverance of God. Everybody saw. Now, that's got to shake your faith in some way. It's got to change what you believe in some way. And they saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. Their hair on their heads was not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Now look, when I barbecue, I get it worse than this. The hair on my knuckles and my forearms is burned. I smell like smoke. I like that. I got no problem with that. But these guys come out supernaturally delivered. It's not that they happened to mate, they just survived despite their third-degree burns. Right, ma'am?
There was a supernatural man in the fire.
Nita says there was a supernatural man in the fire with them. Now let's go back and talk about who is this? Who is this fourth, the one who's like a son of the gods or one who's like the son of God? Who is that?
Well, my Bible said it could have been an angel.
Could have been. What do we think? What are the possibilities?
34:7, Psalms. The angel of the Lord encamped around about them and will fear them and deliver them. So we know it was at least an angel of the Lord, if not Jesus Christ himself. Now that is my belief.
I think those are our two choices.
That's what I believe.
Is it the angel of the Lord, or is it the pre-incarnate Son of God?
Amen.
And now, I got a harder question for you, which we will not answer tonight. Is that the same thing?
I'll tell you, I had a theory about that.
Lots of people do. Is that the same thing? Now, if you were being led out of Egypt in the Exodus, then there would have been a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire in front of you. And we're told the angel of God was in the pillar. The angel of God was leading out Israel from Egypt. Now, what does the word angel mean anyway?
Messenger.
Pat?
Messenger.
It means messenger. In the New Testament, it definitely means messenger. In the Old Testament, sometimes it means more like agent. Right? Because does this angel of God, angel of the Lord, one like a son of man, does he say anything? Not here. If he does, we don't hear it. Is there a message? No. Right, so it's more like agent here than it is messenger. But yes, the idea is that the king is Melech and Malach is angel, messenger. He works for the king. He is a subordinate to the king. And that's kind of the sense that Nebuchadnezzar gives us here. The fourth is like a son of the gods. Then later on, Nebuchadnezzar calls him his angel. He calls him his angel. So some people really, really need to make this Jesus in the fiery furnace. I'm kind of one of them. Now, interpretively and exegetically, I can't. I cannot establish it. Theologically, I need for it to be, and I'll show you why. Okay, here we go. Nebuchadnezzar answered, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." Who does that? Who is it that saves us from the wrath of God? Who is this that delivers us from the lake of fire? Who is it?
Christ is righteous.
So now, theologically, when we start making this about us, we're really quick to make it Jesus. And I have a hard time telling the difference when I'm listening to what the angel of the Lord says in the Old Testament, when it's the angel of the Lord and when it's the Lord. I'm having a hard time. Then the angel of the Lord appeared and said, "I will," and says what God is going to do. Is the messenger just the mouthpiece and then God's words come out? Or is there some kind of relationship there? Yes, I'm leaning towards some kind of Trinitarian idea.
But you take the text for what the text says.
But we start.
Yeah, that's right.
We start with the text. You know what, Leroy? Amen, and that's right. So, just to recap about how to interpret the Bible.
Yeah.
We start with what does the text say? We've got to get to that. What did it mean to its original audience? Right? And the original audience doesn't know anything about Jesus. Nothing. Nothing explicit. Then we have to say, after we know what the text says, here we know that it says son of the gods, and we know that it says in verse 28, sent his angel. But now we have to do what's called interpretation. And we interpret it and we go, does this have to do with us? Does this have to do with salvation? Well, yes. See, how do we interpret this? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had faith. They demonstrated their faith by their faithfulness. They said, we know God can deliver us. And because of that, God sent an agent to save them. Now we flash forward to what we know from the New Testament and about ourselves. We say, how are we saved? We're saved by faith. And it is an agent of God, namely his son, and the word son does appear here. So you've got first to establish what does the text say. That's called exposition. Then you've got to say, what does the text mean? It means the Hebrew boys, because of their faith in God, they were delivered. They didn't believe that God was able to save them or willing to save them, they would have bowed down and they would have been idolaters and maybe they would have been destroyed. I don't know. But because of their faith, they were saved. That's called interpretation. See, it doesn't say they came out of the fire unsinged, their hair wasn't singed, didn't smell like smoke because of their faith. Nope, we have to interpret to get there. The third step, we got exposition, interpretation, application. The third step is, what do we do with this information? Okay, look, it's nice that you know, it's nice that you think maybe the statue's face moved. Who cares? The question is, what are you going to do now that you've read this story? That's application. And I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to believe in him who has called us to believe in him, and we are not going to compromise. And when we come up with a gun against our head, we are not going to recant, and we are not going to give up on our convictions. And when our friends say, come with us and let's do this immoral thing, let's hide and wait, and we will fall on them in the road, says the Proverbs. Let's go. Hey, I know this movie that you just got to see, Chaplain. We will not be led astray by our peers. Come with me out to this club where women take their clothes off. Hey, I'm just going to need a ride home later because I'm going to drink a lot. I know you got my back. That person will lead you down and say, bow down before this idol. And we are not going to do that. We are going to remain faithful to our God because we believe in who he is. And in the fiery trial, whether we are burned up or not, we will be saved. That's application. That is. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. They move up again. But it was powerful. And the story, the application is that you're going to be advanced in the kingdom of God. Your body might be destroyed, but you're going to be advanced in the kingdom of God. But do you think that Nebuchadnezzar's reaction is correct? He says, anybody says anything against their God is going to get cut into pieces. Does he say, tear down my idolatrous image? He's a polytheist.
He goes with the flow, okay?
He just says, wow, that's a powerful God, but what is that to me? Can you have a religious experience and not be transformed by it? Yes, you can. In fact, you can go to church your whole life. And you can offer prayers, and you can tithe, and you can light candles, and I'm not going to start talking about other people's practices, but you can be a very religious person and never come to Christ.
That's right.
You could be a very religious person and never give your heart to the Lord.
Right.
Religion isn't going to... Nebuchadnezzar is super religious. He calls everybody for a mandatory worship service. He names all of his servants after the gods of his land. Worship is really important. He's super religious, but he is lost. And by that I mean he is not saved. He does not believe in a saving way in the God of Israel. You just got to wonder, didn't that statue stand out there as long as he lived? Don't you just wonder, as a testament to his arrogance? And I don't know, sooner or later time took it down, or some other men threw a rope around it and pulled it down and stole the gold and melted it and made statues of something else. I don't know. But don't you think that Nebuchadnezzar, even though he seems to turn to the God of Israel here, he doesn't. He just makes another barbarous threat. It's not apparently I can't threaten people with throwing them in the fiery furnace anymore.
Well, he was brought down to his knees.
Yes. Oh yeah. Now we will get to it in chapter 4. Chapter 4 is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Chapter 4 is my personal experience. Chapter 4 is the reason I can never be arrogant. And I once said, this great Babylon of mine that I have made, and God brought me low. It's not the way you want to. It's not the way you want to become humble. It's not the way you want to become humble. It's a blessed chapter. I'm going to pray for us and we'll be dismissed. But next week, we're not going to look at chapter 4. Next week, we're going to look at Daniel chapters 1 through 3, where we find them in the New Testament. Okay? And I got to do some serious homework. I know that's out there, but I'm going to have to dig those references together, and we'll kind of look at them string of pearl style, one at a time, just so that you can see how Daniel impacted the New Testament writers. Let's pray, and we'll be dismissed.